Snow fell in unbroken veils, swallowing the horizon and the sound of men until the world was only breath and blade and the crackle of torches struggling in the wind. Jon rode through the open gates of Winterfell with ice in his beard and frost stiffening the edges of his cloak, a dark rider against a plain of white. He had thought the walls would feel like home when he reached them again. They did not. The stones were older than memory and as cold as the night, and every arrow slit seemed an unblinking eye. The north had always been a place of long silences. Now even those felt borrowed, a last inhalation before the lungs themselves seized and went still. He dismounted without speaking and passed the reins to a boy from the Dreadfort whose name he had forgotten. The boy's fingers shook as they closed around the leather. Jon set a gloved hand on his shoulder for the heartbeat of a moment, a gesture with no words to carry it, and moved on. Men hurried by with ladders and bundles of arrows wrapped in old rags for quick lighting. Women and lads hauled barrels of pitch, thicker than blood in the cold. From the godswood came the muffled ring of metal, Gendry's hammer on dragonglass, bright sparks dying in the snow. It would not be enough. Jon had learned the shape of not enough the way a sword learns the shape of its owner's hand. He found Sansa on the rampart above the inner ward, her hair bound in a knot beneath a hood of gray fur. Snow clung to her lashes, making pale fans when she blinked. She stood with her hands tucked into her sleeves, an old lady's posture learned too young, and looked out toward the plain. "They march," she said as he stepped beside her. "I know. They do not tire." "They do not," he agreed. "But we do." She turned her head then, not fully, as if some part of her could not stand to look away from the dark line creeping toward them. "You look worse than when you left. That is a marvel." "I saw their scouts," he said, blue eyes in the trees. "The wind didn't move them." "Nothing moves them," Sansa told him. She smoothed a bit of frost off the parapet with her knuckles and glanced down into the yard, where a clutch of old men from White Harbor were lighting braziers along the wall. "Except heat, except fire." Jon followed her gaze instinctively, to the braziers, to the torches, to the pale line of smoke rising from the smithy. Beyond the smoke, the weirwood lifted its limbs like the ribs of a great beast the snow had stripped clean. He used to come to that tree as a boy to sit in its roots and pretend they were the folded knees of a mother too large to hold him. He had prayed there the night before he took the black. He had prayed there the night he learned he was not who he thought he was, and yet could not bear to be anything else. The face carved in the bark stared back at him with bleeding eyes that never closed. "Where is Arya?" he heard himself ask, knowing the smallness of the question in the face of everything. "In the halls, moving like smoke. She puts knives in places we didn't know had places." That almost pulled a smile from him. He let the almost be enough. "And Bran, where he always is when he's most himself." Sansa did not say the word, but Jon felt it all the same. Rooted, the wind shifted. Something came riding it, a taste so cold it burned. Jon remembered ice on the lake beyond the wall, the way it groaned before it cracked and swallowed men whole. He remembered the sound Hodder made holding a door against a flood that would not end. The army was close enough now that the snow seemed to dull in the air, each flake more sluggish than the last, as if time itself had to work harder to pass through them. He left Sansa there and went down to the yard. Ghost waited in the lee of a wagon, white fur rimed with frost, eyes catching what little light the storm spared. The dire wolf padded at his side as Jon crossed toward the godswood. He had not intended to go there. His feet knew it before his head did. He stepped into the grove, and the snow fell softer. The air felt thicker, as if filled with the dust of old voices. Bran sat before the heart tree on a low sled covered in furs. His eyes were open and clear and deeper than the pond in summer. A small fire smoked nearby, a mean little thing that seemed ashamed to be making any heat at all. The red leaves moved without wind, or else Jon imagined they did. "You went out too far," Bran said, though Jon had not told him where he'd been. "I went where I had to. You always do. That's why you're tired." Jon knelt on the snow, his knees numb immediately. He laid Longclaw across his thighs. The steel looked black in that light, all the ripples of its forging swallowed. I've fought them with every man I could gather. I've burned them, I've broken them with dragon glass. But the one who leads them wants to unmake us, Bran said softly, as if we were a story he never liked. Jon studied his brother's face. He had learned to read men over the years, to see the small tells that betray a liar or a brave man pretending not to fear. Bran's face held nothing to read. He was older than his bones. How do we stop a story? With a better one, Bran said. With an older one. Jon lifted Longclaw. The weirwood face watched him. You're talking like a maester. I'm talking like a tree. Listen. Jon tried. Beneath the hiss of falling snow, beneath the tick of branches shedding their loads, there was a sound like someone breathing through a cracked reed. There were words in it if you stopped trying to hear them. He stopped trying. A memory rose in him. Not his, not anyone's he knew. A forge hammered under a black sun. A river of moonlight poured into a mold. Men whose names had been swallowed by the world-fed coals with dragonbone and the blood of kings. And the fire burned a blue no sky ever wore. He smelled salt. He smelled ash. He saw a sword lifted from a bath that was not water and flare like a waking. Valyria, he whispered. Yes, Bran said, the word a thread on the air. And before that, Longclaw was Valyrian steel, made when that art was still a song men could sing. It had been old when his father was young and older than the vows at the wall. Yet even this blade had its hunger. Jon could feel it in his palms. A yearning toward the thing that would finish it or unmake it in one breath. What are you asking of me? Jon said to his brother, his tree, to the winter that had always known his name. I'm not asking, Bran said. I'm telling. The spear that unhorsed dragons can shatter all your walls. Break his spear, and the tale turns. Don't, and it ends here. Jon looked at the little fire and then at the mouth of the black iron brazier beside the sled, where coals nursed their heat. He thought of Daenerys's dragons screaming in a sky that refused to be warmed. He thought of the way fire fled before that spear, of the wicked glitter of it turning the air to a window that the cold walked through. The Night King's spear ate heat. If a spear could eat, something could hunger more. Some fires burned forward and some burned back, eating not what the world had laid out but what it had not yet made. Valyria's fire had done that once. So had another fire older than men and dragons both. He rose. We don't have the time to speak in leaves, he said. Tell me what to do. Bran lowered his eyes. For an instant he was his little brother again. A boy in a saddle he could not outgrow, hair falling across his brow. Then the instant was gone. The steel remembers, he said. Longclaw was born of dragon's breath and the craft the doom devoured. But it slept in a winter that was not this one, and that winter took things first men would not let it have. The children did not make swords. They taught the people who did to listen. Listen to what? To the fire that wants to live inside the steel, Bran said simply. It is not dragon fire. It is not the fire that eats wood or flesh. It is the fire that wakes at dawn. It is the red that runs beneath skin and makes hands close when they need to. It is a promise taking shape. Jon felt a foolishness rising in him and pushed it down. A man who had come back from death once had little right to scorn a second chance because the path to it wore strange shoes. He wrapped both hands around Longclaw's hilt and lifted the sword toward the tree. The carved face regarded its reflection in the rippled steel. For a heartbeat the eyes seemed to bleed more brightly. The snow tasted of iron. What do I do? Jon asked, and the tree did not answer. Bran did. He told Jon to take the sword to the blacksmith and to ask for a forge that wasn't his. To ask for the kind of heat men do not own. To feed it with something that was never wood, never coal, never any fuel that could be counted in carts. Jon would know when he saw it. He would be afraid of the wrong thing at first, and then he would be afraid of the right thing. And then he would not be afraid. You're speaking circles, Jon said. But he felt the shape of the circle and understood it was a snare the world was setting for him to walk through, not into. Gendry looked up when Jon darkened the smithy's doorway. The big lad's face was smudged with ash. His hair stood up like straw around a stone, and his breath steamed as he worked the bellows. He had been making points for spears, squat black teeth that would taste blue light soon. "You need something?" he asked, and saw the sword in John's hands and answered himself. "Not need. Want. Both," John said. He set Longclaw on the anvil. Sparks tried to wake along the fuller and died. "I need a forge that isn't yours." Gendry glanced past John, perhaps expecting a king or a storm to explain what this strange man meant. The storm obliged. A gust shouldered the door and threw a fine skin of snow onto the coals. They hissed like a thirsty man given sour beer. Gendry made a noise in his throat, annoyed without choosing to be. "I've only the one," he said. "Unless you mean the sort they keep in stories, the ones that shine from inside a mountain." John considered telling him. He did not. The words would come out like smoke that could not find a chimney. "I'll borrow that one if I can find the door," he said. Gendry gave him a look that was half challenge and half benediction. "That sword's older than you," he observed. "It is. Sometimes the older things say yes quicker. Sometimes," John agreed. "Can you heat it?" "I can heat anything that will take a heat," Gendry said. "But I'm not remaking Valyrian steel. That's not a thing a man says he can do unless he's lying, and I don't like lies. They make the forge go cold." "I'm not asking you to remake it," John said. "I'm asking you to wake it." "Ah!" Gendry looked at the door then, as if the mountain might come open and oblige them to step inside. "I don't know that song. I can sing loud, though." "This isn't loud," John said. "It's listening." Behind him the yard thrummed with the steps of men trying to be of use and the clack of teeth refusing to keep rhythm with any drum but fears. He thought of the spear again, how it had flown clean through sky as if air were no more than cloth hung up to dry. He thought of its sound, like glass finding a crack it had been dreaming of for 1,000 winters. He had a sense that if he did not move now, something would arrive that no movement after could undo. He did not move toward the anvil or the coals. He moved out of the smithy and across the yard, Ghost trotting at his heels. The direwolf's tongue hung from his mouth, but not in heat. The cold had a taste. Ghost was trying to know it. John walked under the first arch, then beneath the second, and then into the godswood again, which surprised him, but not as much as it might have 2 hours ago. Bran had not followed. Bran did not need to. The tree waited. The grove had its own quiet. The snow fell less faithfully air, wary perhaps of the red leaves that did not welcome it. John unsheathed Longclaw. The blade sang, a short sound, a throat clearing. "What are you?" he said, knowing the question would never be answered in the language of men. The red eyes dripped. The white bark hardly seemed to notice. He knelt again. He set Longclaw across his lap again. Ghost lay down beside him, head on paws. John closed his eyes and thought of heat he had known. The forge at Winterfell when he was a boy, old Nan's bread steaming in the kitchen, the breath of a horse against his neck, the sudden flare of a torch when a tunnel wanted you to think yon never would see daylight again. He thought at last of Dragonfire, not as he had seen it rake the ground and turn men into ash holding the shapes of themselves, but as he had seen it when he touched Riegel's neck in the cold light before dawn and felt a living furnace, not cruel, not kind, only itself. He held that memory and let it pass through him and into the blade. He felt nothing change and then realized what he had expected was wrong. It was not the sword that had to agree to this. It was he who did. He opened his eyes. The world had sharpened by a quarter turn. The tree's red leaves were not the red of blood, but the red of fire seen through shut eyelids. He could smell something beneath the smell of snow. Sap, yes. But also the dry iron scent that comes when the first morning of spring touches the place where a river meets a cold stone. That small place is always warmer first. It remembers heat as a promise. John set Longclaw's point into the thin frost that had formed around the roots where breath had not reached and watched it melt a track no steam rose from. "Fire that isn't fire," he said. A raven dropped from a high branch and landed in the snow with a whisper. It cocked its head and looked at him with a single bright eye. Its beak opened and closed, the sound more like the click of a small latch than a call. Either the bird was too cold to speak or it simply didn't need to. John rose. He carried Longclaw as if it had grown heavier, which perhaps it had. He brought it back to the smithy, where Gendry had banked the coals and was wrapping his big hands in a rag to keep from losing skin when he grabbed hot iron. "Found your other forge?" he asked. He said it like a jest, like he half believed in the possibility of it and half scorned himself for the belief. "I found something," John said. He put the sword on the anvil again. "Can you heat this without fear?" Gendry's slight smile vanished. Fear is a tool, he might have said on a different day. Fear keeps men from standing where death will certainly walk. Today he only nodded. He worked the bellows until the coals glowed as if each one held its own small sun. John held Longclaw above them and watched the ripples on the blade. The heat should have reached the steel and red-rimmed it, but the blade drank only what it chose to drink and seemed content with less than a swallow. "It's Valyrian," Gendry muttered. "It takes its own advice." "Put this in with it," John said. He reached into his cloak and drew out the thing he had not known he would take a few moments before. A strip of weirwood bark, the snow had loosened from the hard tree at the place where the frost had melted. He felt ridiculous even as he held it. The thin curl looked like the nail a woman might save after trimming it, an absurd keepsake. Gendry's eyes flicked from the bark to John's face and back. "You're about to ask me to blaspheme," he said. "I'm about to ask you to do what the world requires," John said. His voice felt calm, which unsettled him more than any fear could have. "Feed it to the coals." Gendry hesitated. He had not been raised a Northman. The old gods were not his. But he had swung a hammer long enough to know that there were things you do not put into a fire if you do not want to call something out of it. He looked at John and then at the shape of the storm moving heavy as a wall past the open door and thrust the strip into the heart of the coals. The smithy filled with a smell that was not char, not sap, not anything John had a name for. The coals did not flare. They throbbed once, and a color passed through them that no paint could copy. The air seemed to thicken. Gendry swore softly and lifted the bellows once, then thought better of it. John held Longclaw above that glow and felt the blade loosen in his hands. Not as steel loosens, but as sleeping men do when they give their weight to those who carry them. "It's not hot," Gendry said, confusion plain, wonder shouldered under it. "It's not the sort of hot you can feel with skin," John answered. "I think it's the sort you feel with your blood. Bloody convenient that we keep that inside," Gendry said. His attempt at humor came out hoarse. "What now?" "Now we let it eat," John said, and he did not know why he'd said those words until he saw that he had not been mistaken. The blade's darkness was changing. It was not brightening. It was growing more itself, the ripple lines clarifying until he could trace each wave back into the hilt and through it, as if they were veins running to a heart. He could smell spring again, the moment where the river meets the cold stone. He could almost taste it. Outside, a horn blew. Another answered. The long cry was swallowed by the night. John lifted Longclaw. The blade had weight now that was not the weight of iron. He held it toward the door. It did not steam. The cold that had pressed on the threshold drew back by a thumb's breadth and then held, resentful. "We'll test it soon enough," he said, more to the storm than to Gendry. On the ramparts, men's faces were masks of snow. Torches sputtered. Arya passed like a wisp of wind carries leaves. She seemed to stop beside him without crossing the distance, the way certain new fears appear in the mind fully formed. "You look different," she said, peering at Longclaw without pulling her yes to the blade. She kept them slightly to one side, as if to avoid being caught by it. "Not worse, not better, like you stepped through something." "I think I did." "Good. I hear we could use someone who knows how to step through things." The white plane moved. It had not been still before, but the mind learns to accept certain motions as stillness. Now the motion found its shape. Black branches of men rose like coral from a sea. Between them, the dead flowed. They did not shout. They did not beat shields. They did not waste breath on that which had no use. They came on like a tide at night, the hush louder for its absence of any single noise. Here and there blue lights pricked through the snow, eyes that saw heat and hungered, or were too old to hunger and had replaced hunger with something crueler. The first ranks hit the wooden chevaux de frise and broke like water around rocks. The second ranks rolled over them. The torches took. The pitch spat back at the snow. Fire licked bone and sent up a hiss like winter boiling. Jon's eyes searched the plain above and beyond the press, and there, on a low rise where the wind had scoured the snow thinner, he saw him. The Night King rode nothing a man would call a horse. The shape beneath him was a thing remembered by bones more than by tongues. He held the spear loosely, a laziness that said no world had ever taught him to fear losing it. Jon's hands tightened around Longclaw's hilt. The sword felt eager. It made him wary. An eager blade is a danger to its master first. He climbed down the steps into the outer yard and then through the gate where a knot of men waited for command that did not come. He did not look at them as he passed. For a moment he knew how Robb must have felt the morning of every battle, the heavy clarity that settles on the heart when the heart knows it must be given away again. Ghost paced at his side, hackles lifted, heat venting in careful breaths. Arya came as far as the inner arch and then vanished upward. Jon knew she would find a place where small movements could mean the world. He strode into the whiteness and met the first of the dead that found him there. Longclaw cut, and the thing parted cleanly. He had experienced that before. A good sword against a man whose bones had not made peace with their flesh. This was different. The cut was not a separation only. It was an insistence. The blade did not slice the dead thing as a butcher's knife slices fat from muscle. It told the parts they had never been joined, and the knight agreed. The body fell into pieces so suddenly it seemed to learn the truth in the same instant the truth was spoken. The cold rushed toward Jon, curious. He lifted the blade, and the rush paused. That pause gave him something like hope, and hope felt like a fire struck in a place where the wind could not find it. He cut again. He cut a third time. He moved forward through the snow toward the rise and the rider upon it because a simple path had opened in him, and there was no time left to walk any other. The spear in the Night King's hand glinted when the wind tore a gap in the falling veils. Jon tried to remember that the spear only seemed to glint. It drank light. It did not give it. He reached a shattered cart where 3 men had made a small stand and given up everything but breath to the giving. One still lived. The man's beard was white with rime, his eyes red where blood had burst the small vessels in them. He gripped Jon's sleeve. "Lord," he croaked, though Jon was no lord anyone had sworn to. "Hold," Jon said, not sure to whom, and kept moving. Ghost leapt over a low drift and disappeared into a cluster of whites, and their movements became a tangle of lines that ended sharply. The dire wolf returned with ice on his muzzle and blue ichor steaming faintly in the cold. The rise seemed to roll itself further away as Jon approached it, the way a bad dream arranges distance so that there is never quite enough foot beneath you to close it. He kept his eyes on the spear, the long, pale shape like a shard broken from a mountain, because eyes fall into other eyes and he did not want to drown. He clambered up through snow that had the texture of ash. At the top, he found something like a plateau carved by the wind's hand. The Night King sat his not horse and watched Jon's breath. He lifted the spear. Jon did not run. He did not set himself as he would have at any other time in his life, hips narrow, shoulder turned to present less target. He stood as if a door had opened in him and he needed to make himself a hinge. The spear left the Night King's hand. It did not fly. Flying implies air yields. The spear chose the world ahead, and the world complied. Jon saw it in the space between falling snowflakes, crossing a distance that belonged to no map. He lifted Longclaw and did not swing to strike it aside. He would never have been fast enough. He did not try to catch it point to point. He held the sword so that the spear would meet it along its middle, and in the heartbeat before the impact, he let something he had held back all his life go. The world did not light. The sound it made was not metal. It was the sound a frozen river makes when the first thaw pulls at its bones. It was the sound of a chest cracking open to receive a breath. It was the sound the sky makes when dawn peels up the night with fingers the night cannot deny. The spear struck Longclaw, and the blade did not shatter. It did not chip. It did not even ring. The spear broke. It did not break as spears break when wood fails and fibers pull past one another and the fracture runs. It broke as ice breaks when a warmth it cannot account for slips into its structure and tells the lattice it is no longer the right dream. The spear dissolved along a line that had been waiting inside it since its making, a secret seam. It fell into glitter that tried to be snow and failed, and then into nothing at all. The Night King's head tilted afra. Tyon, and the wind forgot for one long heartbeat to move. The dead all across the plain hesitated in their small tasks. Jon felt a warmth in his hands that had nothing to do with blood. He breathed in once and tasted iron and spring and the barest edge of ash. The Night King drew himself from the saddle. He stepped down as if the ground had come up to meet his foot rather than he lowered it. His armor made a sound like frost being rubbed between finger and thumb. He lifted his hand, and the snowfall around them slowed as if each flake had been asked a question and did not know the answer. Jon did not say any of the things that had gathered in him over the last years, vows and pleas and the simple curse of a man who wants to spit in the face of what will unmake him. He stepped forward. Longclaw seemed to move without effort. The blade left a faint afterimage in the air. Not light. Something like the track your eyes make when you look too quickly from one bright thing to another. The Night King's second spear, where had it come from? Lifted, and then he did not throw it. He swung it as a staff. Jon met it. The cold in the staff pressed along the blade, tried to ache into his arms the way a winter gets into old wounds. The ache found something else there waiting and had to stop at the threshold and consider itself. Jon pressed. The Night King did not give ground. Ghost darted in and then out, teeth finding nothing to hold. The snow around the Night King's feet did not accept footprints. It merely arranged itself in patterns that hinted at having been stepped on once and decided it didn't like the feeling. They fought without words. Men were dying within a spear's throw. Men were being born into their deaths all across the yard. Some stood again into a second life that cheapened both. The living flame along the walls struggled and then rallied. A dragon screamed somewhere, one of Daenerys's, Jon could not tell which, and the sky was briefly a dark cloth lit from beneath. But here, on the low rise, the world belonged to a narrow space where a sword that had remembered something met a spear that had forgotten everything but one task. The Night King tried to slide the spear along Longclaw and used the notch of the hilt to catch and tear the blade aside. Jon let him try. The spear touched the crossguard and found it not a thing made of steel only but of the same stubbornness that ran through the blade. The frost hissing off the spear's pale surface left no rime where it passed. Jon felt a thread run from his hands through the hilt into the blade and out again into the air, as if he were drawing a line to instruct the cold on how it might behave if it wanted to continue to exist in his presence. The cold did not agree to the instruction. Simply made a note of it. That was enough. He fainted left. The Night King did not move. Jon changed his mind and went left anyway. He felt the spear's tip skim the edge of his jerkin and crisp it into something brittle. He brought Longclaw down. The Night King caught it with the shaft, and the blade bit into it. Not splitting it, not yet, but indenting the world around it, making a dent the air itself had to climb out of. Jon wrenched free and cut high, then low, then high again, and each time the spear was where it needed to be to deny him. The blade wanted to sing louder. Jon kept it to a hum. "Now," said a woman's voice far away and worlds near. Melisandre stood on the wall with her hands cupped around a flame that let itself be contained because she had asked nicely enough with all her life. She spoke a word that had not been spoken in that place since the stones of Winterfell had been laid. Those who heard it thought it a prayer or a curse or a child's name. The fire along the ramparts stood up as if to see better. Jon saw the Night King's eyes, which were not eyes. They held an old blue like certain mountain lakes hold depth. For a moment Jon felt the cold admire him. The admiration was not a warmth. It was a clinical interest akin to what a collector feels for a rare beetle. He stepped in with a movement that would have been suicidal with any other blade and any other foe. He cut not at the spear, not at the hand, not even at the space between them. He cut at the intent. The spear faltered. A moment earlier the world had been arranged such that the spear would be where it needed to be to turn aside the sword. A moment later the arrangement failed. Longclaw passed through the spear's shadow and found the pale shaft. It remembered the seam the first breaking had shown it. The spear did not shatter this time. It unmade, like a line erased cleanly from a ledger by the one who keeps the true accounts. The Night King moved back a single step as if to find a more advantageous place to stand and discovered there were no other places. Jon filled that step with himself. Longclaw came up. The Night King raised his hand empty. All across the field dead men stood abruptly straighter, as if an order had called them to attention. Jon thought of the night he had risen from a table and taken breath and felt the shock of being alive. He thought of the cost. He recognized in the Night King's gesture a theft of the very idea of cost. He hated it. "Go to your rest," Jon said, or thought he did, or felt the sword say for him. He cut down. To say the blade met the Night King is to pretend there were two separate things. For an instant, the cold understood that a door had been opened for it, and that something warm and patient was waiting on the threshold with a cup of broth. The cold had always despised the implication of hospitality. It had always preferred the mathematics of absence. It recoiled. Longclaw followed. The cut was not across armor or through bone. It was through a story the world had been telling itself long enough to believe it. The story gave a little at the spine and then broke cleanly. The Night King came apart, not into shards, not into ustemp, into a shape that admitted it had never belonged here. Where he had been, snow fell as if nothing had ever interrupted it. There was a sound like a line being struck from a page. Across the field men who had been dead and busy at it fell in pieces that did not remember their tasks. And some of them were beautiful for the first time in years, their faces emptied of purpose and allowed a sliver of peace. Jon stood in the snowfall and let the sword lower. He did not fall. He thought that was likely to come later. The cold did not end. Winter did not decide it had had its sport and go home. The night breathed and carried the same knives on its breath. But a tightness eased inside it, as if a belt had been loosened a few notches. In that loosening men found room to live a while longer. Ghost pressed against Jon's hip. The direwolf's warmth was honest. Jon placed a hand on his head and felt the fur stuck with ice. He looked down at Longclaw and saw now that the darkness of the steel was not flat. He could see down into it in a way, not as into water, as into the rings of a tree when you cut it and count backward. He did not count. He did not want to know how many years had sat down to make what had just happened possible. He went back toward the gate. The fight did not end with the Night King's unmaking. Smaller wills still directed smaller hungers. But the edge of the tide had been pulled off, and the shore did not have to pretend it was not drowning anymore. Men were capable of heroism again, and sometimes heroism is only the movement made by tired arms when they lift a spear for the 1000th time. Arya dropped down beside him from a ledge he had not known existed and smiled a small white smile that bit its own lip and bled a thin trickle. She wiped her knife on her sleeve. "Did you do it?" she asked, not breathless. "I broke his spear," Jon said, and then heard what he had chosen to say rather than what he had been asked. He cleared his throat. "He is gone." "Good," Arya said. "I was out of room for any more of him." They went inside and found Sansa on the rampart again. Her hood flecked with the snow of a struggle that had not touched her directly and had nonetheless been fought in her blood. She looked at Jon for a long moment. Her eyes slid to Longclaw and then back to his face. She shivered once, a visible convulsion, and then straightened. "Did we win?" she asked. "For tonight," Jon said. "For tonight is a kind of winning," Sansa replied. She put a hand to the stone. "I will take it." They stood together as the moment that had defined their lives passed into one that would come to define their children if the world found a way to let them have any. Men moved below them, some tending to wounded, some tending to those who would not heal from this. The dragons had landed at the far end of the yard, and their heads moved on those long necks in the circling motion of beasts trying to make sense of a hurt that had been removed without being explained. One of them, regal, lifted his muzzle and looked directly at John. The heat of that gaze reached him where he stood. John felt no need he could name. He only nodded. That night the dead were driven back in a way that had not been possible the night before. They were not leaderless. Death is its own leader, but they were uncohered. It was enough. The fires did more than flail. They leaned on the darkness, and the darkness leaned back and then took a step away and learned that it could do that. John fought until the muscles of his forearms burned, and then fought more because there was still sword to hold. Longclaw did not tire. This troubled him and relieved him equally. He trusted his body more than he trusted magic. He did not know if what had entered the blade would ask for payment later. He hoped it had already been paid, in blood, in years, in the trust Ramses and Boltons and Kings had extracted, in a boy's hand once pushed away from his father's shoulder because the boy was a bastard. When dawn came, it came reluctantly, as if the sun had heard poor things about the welcome it would receive. The light it gave was thin and blue, the color of milk in the bowl left out for a cat that never came. John stood at the gate and watched the day think better of itself. Snow still fell, but it fell in a way that admitted it would have to stop someday. He should have slept. Sansa told him as much. Arya ordered him to. Bran said nothing and was already asleep with his eyes open. He did not sleep. A quiet had settled inside him, a room with the windows thrown wide in winter. He did not want to close them yet. He walked the path between the yard and the godswood. The way was trodden by men who had gone to ask old questions in the dark and had come away with either answers or the lack of them. He stepped into the grove. The weirwood waited. The red leaves were rimmed with frost, and each rim glittered like a jewel that never required a light to shine. He laid Longclaw at the roots. The blade looked carved from night. "Thank you," he said, and meant it for whatever had lent him its hand. The tree, the children who had learned to listen, the dragonfire that was not this fire, the men who had made swords when making swords was something more than a practical art, the stubbornness of his father's face when no argument could persuade it, the sweetness of Arya's friendship when childhood still believed in it. He let his breath go and watched it join the morning. Ghost pressed his muzzle to Jon's palm as if to remind him that some thanks can be too solemn. He heard Bran's sled before he saw it and turned to find his brother looking like a piece of the tree that had learned to move. "You're wondering what it made of you," Bran said. "Yes, it made you more of what you already were," Bran told him. "That's all any older magic ever tries to do. That's why men fear it. They don't always like what they are." Jon considered this. The truth of it was bone deep and blunt. He did not like everything he was. He liked enough. "What happens now?" he asked. "Will he come again? Does a thing like that have a second name?" Bran tilted his head and seemed to listen to the snow. "No one knows what a story will do once you break its chosen weapon. It may learn to fight with its hands and be clumsy. It may learn to speak and be worse. It may leave you alone for longer than you think you need before it comes back as something you can't recognize until it's in your house." He looked at Longclaw, then at Jon's face. "But not tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow we will be ourselves again." Jon ran his thumb along the edge of the blade without touching it. He nodded. He would be himself. He suspected that meant he would make mistakes again, and perhaps some of those would be familiar mistakes wearing new clothes. He would love where he ought and where he ought not. He would hold the gate against storms and fail sometimes. He would forgive when he should not and refuse when he should have. He would stand in the snow because that was where he had always stood. It was enough. He lifted the sword and sheathed it. Its weight on his back was a promise in itself. Not that it would always be there. Not that it could always do what it had done atop the rise when the spear met it and learned doubt. But that for so long as he could carry it, he would. He turned from the tree. The path back into the castle lay before him, trodden by many feet and soon to be covered and then trodden again. He followed it. Behind him, the weirwood's eyes bled their slow, perfect tears into the snow. The day was a work day. The dead had left pieces of themselves in the cracks between stones, and those needed to be pried out and burned. The living had left pieces too, and those needed to be gathered with gentleness and the words people say when words can do little good and must do it anyway. John walked among the men and women and did the tasks that require no command. He carried wood. He hauled buckets. He wound a bandage around a spear-bitten thigh and tied it off with patience, as if he had all the time in the world because he had none to spare. Men spoke to him and called him my lord or your grace or John in the same breath, and he let the names go by like birds he had no right to catch. Toward midday, a dragon's shadow crossed the yard. Daenerys came down along the ramparts, hair braided close to keep the wind from stealing it, a cloak over her shoulders that had learned to be warm by lying near a dragon long enough. She stood before him and took his hands, looking at him as if she meant to count his bones and find each one present. "You are alive," she said. "So are you. For now," she said, and glanced past him at the sword. "I felt something last night, in the air. Drogon felt it too. He will not stop sniffing the place you fought in, as if the ground there is made of a metal his mouth knows." John did not know how to answer that. He did not know how to answer most of what Daenerys said to him. He loved her in a way that was not easy and would not ever become so. He looked up at the wall and then back at her. "We broke his spear," he said. He did not like that. "No," she agreed. She squeezed his fingers and let them go. "Break a tyrant's weapon and you peel him. You see what he is underneath." What was he? A story that forgot the people in it, she said. She gave him a look that was both kind and wary. "We should be careful not to do the same." "We should," John said, and meant it. He thought of the way Longclaw had felt in his hand atop the rise and saw how easy it might be to become the kind of man who kept a magic like that ready for any argument that troubled him. He did not want to be that man. He hoped the sword would deny him if he tried. That night they built a fire in the yard and fed to it all that needed feeding. Men sang a little and then less. The wind took their singing and set it aside for some spring day when it could be planted properly. John sat on a low stool and watched the flames work. The heat they made was simple heat, the sort one can feel with skin. He liked it for that. He felt another warmth in him, a deeper ember he would not touch unless he had to. The way a man carries a flask he keeps corked tight and will only open for a particular toast, knowing that once he does there will be less in it forever after. A raven landed on the edge of the firelight and clicked its beak. Bran would have smiled at that. John did the smiling for him in his mind. Across the yard, Arya sat with Sansa and told a story in a tone so dry the words could have been leaves. Daenerys stood with her hand on Drogon's side and let the beast's rumble pass through her and into the ground. Gendry slept on his back with his mouth open, surrendering his snores to the night as if in payment for something he had taken from it during the day. It was not peace. It was enough. In the morning John woke to a quiet so ordinary it felt like a luxury. Snow had fallen in the night, but not unreasonably. The world had not come to an end. It had merely continued, which is the hardest thing for any world to do. He rose and strapped on Longclaw and went to walk the wall. The day was a pale pearl with a crack down one side where tomorrow waited. He found Bran already there. The boy, no, the man, did not turn his head when John approached. He spoke as if finishing a thought begun hours before by someone else. "It will be warmer by noon," he said. "Not by much, but enough to lift the snow from the trees and make it fall in clumps that will frighten the horses." "Good," John said. "Let the horses learn to be brave at something that won't kill them." Bran's mouth shaped what might have been a smile. "You've done a hard thing," he said then. "You will do others. I know. Remember not to let the sword think it did them." John touched the hilt. "It didn't. It won't mind if you remind it." Bran said. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked like a boy again, a boy who had fallen and learned to fly without moving. When he opened them, the blue of morning was in them and something else. "The thing you broke will not be the last tool a dark will uses, but it was the first. First tools matter. They teach all the others how to be." "I know," Jon said, and then, surprising himself, he laughed once, a quiet breath that made a little cloud. "I don't know, but I know enough." Bran nodded as if that were the best anyone could claim. "Go eat," he advised. "You're thin as a sword." Jon did as he was told, because sometimes a man can only be wise by pretending he hadn't thought of the wise thing first and letting someone younger deliver it to him as a kindness. He ate bread and a bowl of something too salty, and he liked the salt. He stood again and went down into the yard and into the day that was starting. He would worry later about whether the magic in Longclaw would sleep quietly in its scabbard or twitch when his temper did. He would worry later about the cold's next trick and whether it would come as a whisper in the night or a storm that declared itself on the horizon. He would worry later about names and thrones and the way stories try to decide who gets to tell them. For now, he would mend a gate hinge with his own hands and then spar with a boy who had not slept and wanted to learn how to stand when his legs shook. He would speak with Sansa and make certain the food stores were counted again. And he would stand with Daenerys when she spoke to men who did not know whether to kneel or to build another wall higher than the last. He would carry water to the forge and hand Gendry a rag and not speak about mountains or songs. He would pass through the Godswood and nod to the tree, and the tree would nod back the way trees do, which is to say not at all and entirely. The world had bent last night and not broken. He had broken a spear that thought it could refuse bending forever. He would bend. He could bend and still be himself. That was his magic, older than any fire. He let the day take him, and the day did, as days will when they see a man ready to be taken. The snow fell light, and somewhere beneath it the river found the first stones warm enough to let a trickle pass. The sound it made was nothing like a trumpet and entirely like a promise. He listened to it until he could not hear it anymore and then kept listening. The morning after the pyres, the small sounds of Winterfell returned like shy animals. Iron clanking in measured beats, boots scuffing frost from stone, water poured from ladles into buckets with a hollow plunk. Jon took them into himself as if they were medicine. He walked the perimeter twice, once with his eyes on the wall's teeth and once with his senses folded inward, listening for any drag in his breath or tremor in his fingers that might tell him something had shifted in him and not settled back. Longclaw rode easy against his spine. Its presence was weight and vow. It did not whisper. In the great hall, heat pressed out from a hearth the size of a fisher's cottage. The plume up the chimney sounded like a distant sea. Lords and strangers crowded the trestles. Karstark shoulders hunched tight against umber-hard mouths. Glover men measuring out the steps to their cups. Mormonts sitting small and square as if their chairs were saddles. The Unsullied kept their neat lines along the walls. Spears stood upright, faces still. Northern eyes slid toward them and slid away again. War teaches the living new neighbors and leaves them no time to become friends. Daenerys stood before the high table with Drogon's shadow briefly crossing the high slits of the windows. Only a memory of it, a trick of the fire's gusting when the wind found a seam. She had not asked for a throne here. She had asked for a hearing. Sansa had given her a table and let it carry the weight of custom so that pride would not have to. "All of you saw what came in the night," Daenerys said. Her voice was ragged from smoke and shouting orders atop a wall where dragons wheeled, yet it carried cleanly. "You saw the dead stop. You saw the ice loosen. That was no dream. It was no gift from me alone, or from the gods alone, or from anyone alone. Because nothing that needs to be done in this world is given to one person to do and be done." She looked at Jon then with a softness that did not ask permission to be seen. "The threat is broken, not ended. Snow is still with us, and hunger comes after snow. The South will look north and see weakness, or it will look north and see allies. I choose the second, but I will not choose it for you." Sansa's hands rested on the table, as if it were a map of the North she had pressed flat with her palms. "The North remembers," she said, and the words moved through the hall like embers settling. "We remember what comes of promises from the South. Oaths become chains there. Yet we also remember who bled beside us when the night knocked at our gate and the gate held. The Dragon Queen did not stay warm beneath the southern roof. Her hearth was our wall. She burned what needed burning and nothing more. Someone snorted softly, and Tyrion's dark gaze twitched toward the sound before flicking back to Sansa. He stood near Grey Worm, a goblet in one hand, his expression a worn coin with only a few features left. "I like the sound of nothing more," he murmured just loudly enough for those nearest to wonder if he wanted it heard. Sansa did not break stride. "We have lived on less than we deserve," she said, "and have been made to thank men for the privilege. I will not do it again. We will speak plain here. The North is not a child to be told her marriage and handed her veil." The murmuring thickened. A few lords pounded their cups once on the boards. Not quite a cheer, not quite a threat. Davos Seaworth raised 2 fingers, the old habit of a smuggler courting the favor of a wind. "Plain then," he said, "plain as salt. We're at 2 winters' worth of grain if we stretch it with sawdust and honor. That's the kind of plain that kills. If you mean to stand independent, my lady, you'll want ships to bring in what the earth won't give. I can find ships, perhaps, but I can't make seas gentle, and the Golden Company doesn't melt just because we ask nicely." "Cersei has the company," Tyrion said. He took no pleasure from the knowledge. "Euron Greyjoy has her sea. Qyburn has her darker inventions. She has no interest in corpses that won't kneel. She prefers the living for that. And after last night," Jon said, and every face swung to him as if pulled on a wire, "she'll hear that the Winter's Breaker came north and broke something truly. She'll take it for weakness that we need a southerner's help to set our roof beams back. She will come if only to punish the thought of debt she didn't write. Or to burn our corpses with wildfire and call it mercy," Sansa added, a thin blade laid across the thick of Tyrion's words. "We know the sort of mercy that comes southward." Daenerys's jaw worked. She said it still. "I cannot help that I was born where I was born," she said. "I can help how I stand here and what I offer." She lifted her chin and faced the lords one by one as if learning their names by their scars. "I do not yet have the South. Cersei sits there like a clot of blood in a vein. I intend to remove her. The North can help and I will remember it. Or you can let me go and watch me do it with others who will call me theirs, and I will remember that too. But whether you knit yourselves to me or not, I will not leave this land to starve. I have dragonfire for frozen rivers. I have men who can harvest when the thaw comes. I have granaries under my control along the Trident from men who prefer coin to loyalty. I brought strength, not chains." Jon turned the temper of the room in his mind the way a smith turns a blade in quench, watching for the right color. He felt the hum in Longclaw's presence. Nothing mystical, only the memory of last night running like a new seam in him, and the weight of eyes waiting for him to make a world in a sentence. He did not want it. He did not step away from it either. "I swore to the North," he said. "I swore to the living. And then I bent the knee to Daenerys so that the living would have a better chance of being alive to call me traitor in the morning if they liked. I won't unsay either. If I am to be thought forsworn by someone at the end of this day, let it be the dead who judge me, not the living who wished me to lie more cleverly." "That sounded very noble," Arya said dryly from the fringe of the hall, flipping a small knife in her fingers so that its hilt touched palm, then air, then palm again. "It's also the only choice. If we send the dragons away because they make us feel small, we'll get to feel smaller under the heel of a woman who smiles when cities burn hot. Keep the dragon. Make it ours by being worth its fire." "You don't keep a dragon," Tyrion pointed out mildly. "No one keeps a dragon. At best you arrange matters so the dragon keeps showing up where you need it most and not where you need it least." Sansa's gaze moved to him, cool as water in a shaded well, and softened at the edges because the mouth that had said those words was one she had come to understand in the currency that mattered, what a man would trench at his feet and call a line he would not step over. "Can you arrange that?" she asked. "I can speak to a dragon's mother," Tyrion said. He bowed the smallest fraction to Daenerys and did not pretend humility more than he had to. "I can advise that we do not begin by scorching the fields we plan to harvest." "Then we are agreed," Sansa said, and the hall exhaled or growled depending on the mouth. "We plan, we eat, we bury. We count our living and count the food and make those numbers meet somehow. We send men to break ice on every brook and river. We burn every heap we missed, and we find the work in which grief is allowed to pause for breath without being told it has no right to. And we send ravens, Davos said, to White Harbor for Meej Mormont's ships and for whatever Wyman Manderley can pry loose from his cellars without calling in his debts so loudly the whole world comes to collect. Wyman is dead. A man from White Harbor said softly, face pinched. Died last winter. His son holds the Merman's Court now. He won't cheat the North, but he'll want paying kind. Then we pay him with coin we don't have yet, Sansa replied. Promise him Southern tariffs cut to the bone when we reopen river trade. Promise him what he can bank with ledgers and with pride. He has both and will want more of the second. The work fell into place the way stones do when the flood that carried them out withdraws and the earth remembers its shape. Men took their orders with the numb fingers of those who will do anything as long as it keeps them from sitting still long enough to hear the voices that sit when bodies can't. Jon found himself pulled into the steady current, listing those tasks a lord should not do and doing a few anyway when his feet took him there. He was carrying sacks to the ice house when Missandei came alongside, breath showing as thin thread. She kept pace a moment without speaking, her hands tucked in her sleeves, eyes widened to drink in a world that still surprised her with what it allowed to breathe. My queen asks if you will come to the Godswood. When you can, she said. She is not impatient. She said the trees have a stubborn silence that suits difficult conversation. Jon set the sack down and straightened. I'll come, he said, and Missandei inclined her head and vanished with that soft-footed ease of someone who has learned how not to disturb other people's circles. He found Daenerys at the edge of the pond that in summer mirrored leaves and in winter held a skin so thin that the snow settling on it could be counted as it landed. She stood very still, arms folded, hair catching in the fur along her collar. Drogon and Rhaegal lay like hummocks of night beyond the tree line, snouts steaming, tails flicking through drifts that hissed when hot skin brushed them. I have never liked trees, Daenerys said without turning. My brother told me stories of groves in the Kingswood when I was small, of stags crowned like kings and hart-hounds and green light that tricked the eye. And then I heard stories of men hanged from branches for failing to please the man who built the throne he sat on from trees he took without asking. Trees did not keep those men safe. I thought them pretty and mostly useless. She looked back at him then. But this place, there is a weight in it I don't know, and I am not ashamed to admit I don't know things when I don't. Jon glanced at the heart tree. Its face watched him with the patient severity of something that has never once hurried. The weight is memory, he said. It doesn't take sides. It just refuses to be rushed. Daenerys's mouth tugged. I could use more of that. I keep wanting to be finished. She paused. You saved us last night. Not alone. But you did the thing no one else could do, and it mattered at once. I will not pretend I am so magnanimous that I don't feel some bite from that. I am a queen. I have been told this since I had knees too small to hold the weight of a crown. Fire answers me, and yet it was you with your northern blade and your northern tree and your stubborn northern way of not speaking until it matters who broke his spear. It wasn't only northern, Jon said. Valyrian steel is not northern. Neither is what woke inside it. Whatever the children called the first fire that isn't fire, it isn't ours to hoard. I only listened. He almost smiled. And I had help. You were on the wall with old magic cupped in your hands and you spoke a word I don't know. You are not small in this story. Melisandre said a great deal to me, Daenerys replied. Not all at once. Mostly to herself, and she let me overhear. She believed in prophecies because she had none of her own to live by. I'm glad of her in the way one is glad of a woman who makes a bridge of her back. Glad to have crossed and glad she is not asked to endure further. She set her palm against the white bark, then drew it back quickly as if she had been scolded. I will not ask you to bend a knee twice, she said then. You did it once for the living. I won't make a sport of your honor. I ask cheaper things of men. Their swords, their ships, their names on a scroll that says they were there when something needed doing. You ask their belief, Jon said. When belief makes the work easier, yes. He drew a breath and let it out slow. I cannot promise the North will call you queen today. Sansa will not be hurried in this either. She will count all the costs and pay some that others think cowardice because she knows lives are coins she will not spend for applause. But I can promise you this. So long as I stand in the North, you will not be made a fool when you stand here. And when we go south, he stopped. The word lay down between them like a cold stone. If we go south, I will not stop you where you are right. Where you are wrong, I will try. She made a small sound at that, amusement but not unkind. I prefer that to the men who only try me in private and praise me in public. Keep your trying honest and in the right order. I will try you as well. We must both be willing to be wrong without making a pyre of it. They stood a while with that truce between them and watched a raven hop along the pond's edge, pecking at something the ice had given up. A thin, pale fish, dead as the thing that once rode an ancient horse on the rise. The bird clicked its beak twice as if tallying a score and carried the prize into the low branches, where it vanished like a voice swallowed in a thick crowd. Bran wants me to go to the crypts, Jon said. He didn't say why. He looks at me now as if he's measuring me for a coat he knows I won't like. All kings wear ill-fitting coats, Daenerys answered. Even the ones who weren't made kings yet. She touched his sleeve. Go. The dead have been speaking more loudly here than they like. They won't stop just because we ask. The stare down into the crypts tasted older than the stone that held it. Jon carried a torch because the darkness down there was not an absence of light only. It felt as if something had taken light into its keeping and was asking you to apply for a loan politely. The statues watched with unswerving eyes. Their wolves had slept through wars and woken to sit stone-faced beside new names. Jon found Bran in the middle aisle, wheels chalking small traces on the floor where he had turned himself around until he faced the place he meant to. You want me to disturb them, Jon said. It was not a question so much as a resignation. You want me to open a thing that men covered once because they understood even then that sometimes memory has to be asked to keep its voice down. Bran's eyes were very bright in the torchlight. Yes, he said, only a little. Just enough to let a story finish speaking that men asked to stop halfway through. Jon lowered the torch until the flame licked nearer to the black iron bands around it. Which one? Brandon's, Bran said. And Jon blinked because of all the Brandons down here that narrowed nothing and everything at once. Bran's mouth tilted, a brief childishness like the shadow of a bird across dust. Brandon the Builder. The old one. The one who is either a dozen men or one man that a dozen men wore like a mask when they did something they wanted remembered. You'd like me to ask him a question? Jon said slowly, as if speaking the absurd would make it less so. Or chip his statue for luck? Open, Bran said, and nodded to the stone lid below the statue's knee. The sort that common men might kneel near and trace a name when they brought some problem they wanted solved by speaking to the bones that had made the problem possible. There is a box inside with a thing in it that wants to be known again. He had it when he died. He asked to be buried with it because he thought no one would remember why it mattered. He was wrong. No one forgot it. They only forgot that they had remembered it once. Jon looked at Longclaw and then at the black lines of mortar and thought of all the men who would call him a desecrator if they saw him pry holy things open because a boy with leaves in his hair told him to. Then he set the torch in a bracket and worked his fingers along the lid. The stone was not so heavy as his heart had prepared him for. He came up with a long sigh and let him set it aside. Inside, bones lay as all bones do. They accused no one. He brushed his gloved fingers carefully over the chest cavity until he found a square of wood the size of a man's palm wrapped in some ancient hide that had refused to rot purely out of obstinacy. He lifted it. The air tasted harsher for a heartbeat. He unwrapped the square. Inside lay a shard of something dull as a morning with nothing to do and yet heavy with the suggestion of work to come. It was metal, but he could not say which. Colorless, weighty without being heavy, cold without being cold in the way iron is cold. A seam ran through it in a small curve like a river on a map. This was once a spear, Bran said. Or a spear was once this. The children shaped the first of the old weapons with their secrets, and then men learned to break secrets and made spears to teach the breaking. This is a memory of that first shape. Put it to Longclaw and see if the blade remembers it. Jon wanted very much to be someone else for a little while. He did not get his wish. He set the shard across his palms and lifted the sword point up in front of him. The torchlight steeped everything orange, the sort of color men assign to warmth when they need to sketch it quickly. He pressed the shard to the blade. Nothing happened that a cynical onlooker could not have called a trick of firelight. The seam in the shard kissed one of the faint ripples in Longclaw's steel, and the lines seemed to learn each other's names. The shard adhered, a magnet to a nail. Jon exhaled and felt the resistance to his breath loosened by a hair's breadth. The way a door sometimes swings more freely if you remember to turn the latch fully. "What am I making?" he asked. "Not a weapon," Bran said. "Or not only. A way through. The spear that kills is not only a spear. It is an idea that wants to make every warm thing admit that it wishes to be cold. This is the opposite. It is not an antidote. Antidotes seek to cancel poisons and end up following them around like shadows. It is a reply. A man speaks a lie. You speak a truer thing. The lie remains in the air. The air chooses which to give breath to. You are asking the air to prefer you." Jon stared at the boy until the statue of the old Brandon behind him seemed to shift, as if to watch the face of his namesake now when battle lines were drawn with fewer stones. "And this helps because the next time the cold thinks to take a shape, it will reach for spears because it has learned it likes them. It will find this shape first and get confused. Confusion is the sort of kindness you can do to a cruel thing. It keeps it from acting at once." Something in Jon's chest unclenched. The relief was not joy. It was a practical man pleased to have been given one more small thing to do that might matter. He wrapped the shard again and set it under his jerkin next to his skin. Felt wrong for a heartbeat. Then it didn't feel like anything at all. When he emerged, Mira Reed stood at the top of the stair with a cloak darkened by melted snow. Her hair was wet and braided to keep it from clumping. Her face set in that determined blankness men mistake for meekness until it is too late. She nodded once at Jon and then at Bran. "My father sends words from the neck," she said. "The mists come earlier. The frogs sing deeper. The marsh has more secrets than last year. He says the south will find the cause when they sink up to their waists in it. Tell him to turn the cause to our favor," Bran said. "There are bands still moving north that don't want to be men of anyone's house. They'll choke in the neck if we teach the reeds to twist just so." Mira's smile was sharp. "I like to teach reeds," she said. By the third day after the breaking, the dead no longer walked in ragged remnants among the pines near the walls. Hunters brought in not meat only but news. The woods had strange gaps in them where sound hung wrong and then corrected as if embarrassed. Regal cracked the skin of the lake 3 times and let men pull buckets through the holes. The horses went mad for the taste of water that had seen Dragon Shadow. Grooms swore they would never go back to stale melt if they could help it. Gendry hammered less and listened more. He listened to Longclaw when it leaned near his bench and pretended not to. He listened to the way coals sound when wood is not only wood but a sliver of a tree that once fed a crown. He tried a sliver of heart tree ash in the quench on a common spearhead and got a hiss that made the hair on his arms lift. He threw the spearhead away and retrieved it again and tucked it into a corner. Some learning you do slowly, then quickly all at once, like water finding a dropped coin with the toe. On the 4th day, a raven from White Harbor arrived with the postscript that mattered more than the rest. 2 cogs laden with barley from Sisterton making for the bite, crew loyal to coin and food. It meant movement, and movement is a kind of love the living give themselves after standing too long in one place. Sansa went to her counting room and came out with a ledger on which a column of figures had been erased and replaced. "We can feed everyone if nothing goes wrong," she said, dry and fierce. "Everything goes wrong. We will feed them anyway." On the 5th day, the horn on the eastern tower called returning friends, not foes. The banner that came ahead of the men made the hall lean forward, as if the whole of Winterfell rose to meet it. The dire wolf sown beside a laggard kraken, black stitched against gray, the ink of companionship written out. Theon pulled his hood back as he crossed the yard and laughed once. A cracked sound. When he saw the dogs that came to sniff him remembered him too well for anyone's comfort. Yara was with him, her hair cropped to the skull on one side. The remaining braid slew across her shoulder like a rope that had remembered a neck. She had that tilt to her mouth that means a woman has wrestled hunger down and given it a name it will answer to. "We've brought something better than old oaths," she said. 24 hulls in the shivering sea that will carry whatever you put in them, whether it's grain or men or a kind of trouble I like. And I brought a promise I made to a dragon once to see his mother fed, because I would rather live in a world where the woman who talks to dragons is not my enemy. "Do your sailors like ice?" Davos asked, eyes creasing. "They'll learn to. They like silver," Yara said. "And warm girls and boys they can pay who will take their coin and not their teeth. They like songs the next day that aren't dirges. I can buy them all that with what you give me and sell it twice over in White Harbor without Wyman's son calling me a cheat to my face." She clapped Jon on the shoulder and did not pretend her hand did not come away cold. "I heard you broke a spear," she added as if congratulating him on a net well cast. "I broke a story," Jon said. "Spears were in it. Try to break a few ships while you're at it," Yara said. "Euron's. Preferably with him on them. I'll bring you the horn when I tear it out of his throat." The plans for southward moved from rumor to map then. Tyrion laid them with his neat hands, palms flat, fingers a compass. Grey Worm stood and watched without any pretense of understanding politics as other men spoke it. His politics were precise lists that ended in the same place. Who lives, who dies, which roads you do not allow your enemy to use even if it makes you a monster for the day. He marked crossings and choke points and did not talk about glory. Brienne came north from the roads 2 days later with her cloak flecked and her jaw grim. She brought Podrick and the news that a dozen different small kings in the Riverlands were trying to be noticed by choosing the wrong side flamboyantly. She had turned 3 with argument and 1 with the sudden appearance of a dragon in the poor man's field, which had clarified his priorities. Lady Catelyn wanted a world in which keeping your word made sense, she told Sansa, voice low, looking past the woman she served at the memory of the woman she had loved. "We can make a world where it makes sense again if we push all the men who get in the way into ditches and don't feel too badly about it." "I feel badly," Sansa said simply. "I keep walking. Those two things sit badly together. I don't kill them both to make myself more comfortable." Brienne bowed her head in respect not to a queen, but to a woman who had said aloud the thing most rulers gnaw at in private until it numbs them. A raven from the Vale came winging hard, bearing Robin Arryn's spidery seal, and a letter clearly written by someone else guiding his hand. "The Vale stands ready," it said, "provided the winter roads can be cleared across the high passes." Sansa read it twice and then sent a note back with an edge in it only those who had marched those passes would feel. A list of rations and men and rope and the timing of avalanches she had learned from men who lived in cold on purpose because it allowed them to be alone with their grief. Jon asked Bran in the evening if the cold had a shape left that mattered. Bran's eyes went pale as if covered by a film of winter and then focused again. "It is busy being nothing," he said. "It will stop being nothing again someday. Today is a day for men and their tangle." "Good," Jon said, meaning not that it was good only, but that it was good enough to carry him through this hour. They set the departure as the moon slid between lean crescents. The dragons would go first and last, not circling like showy banners, but moving where they could be used as tools that chose when to be tools. The Unsullied would be the arrow-straight spine of the march. The Northern Lord's men would be the ribs that kept the heart safe while it moved. The Riverlands would send their trickles to fill those hips and knees. It was a body in motion, an old metaphor Jon remembered from Maester Aemon's mouth when he spoke of realms and kings. Bodies must be fed or they eat themselves. On the morning they left, Jon stood at the gods wood one last time. Snow had fallen in a thin sheet over the pond and lay unmarred by anything but the track of a fox as fine as script. He touched Longclaw's pommel and then the bark. Words would have felt small. He let the silence lift and lay over him. He listened, not because he expected to hear anything, but because listening was the best he could do for the memory of a boy who had come here with questions and left with more and kept coming back anyway. On the road south, the world changed color by degrees. Winter north of the neck is a blue that gets into your bones. South, near the swamps, it is a green-gray that confuses birds. By the time they crossed the Trident, it was a brown with promises in it, the sort of brown that means, if you scratch me properly, I will give you green back. Villages that had closed their shutters when the white things went through cracked them open when dragons passed in the distance, and then flung them wide when they saw men under banners tea. At were not skulls. Children ran to the verges, snot frozen at their nostrils, and shouted questions men could not answer in any tongue. When, why, how long will you be back? Will you take my father if I give you this bread? They took the bread and left a fish in return when they had one. The exchange felt like a promise you do not say out loud in case it breaks. At Moat Cailin, Yara's men and the Manderley banners clustered, fattish dolphins flapping in a wind they had not chosen. The stones still smelled damp, old wars trapped in their pores. John walked the high platform and looked south and felt the delight of a man who sees a road he has traveled before and knows its fear better than his current one. He missed the wall in a way that felt like losing a tooth, tongue always going back to try and find it where it used to be. In the Riverlands, Brienne guided them along ways that Mud had forgotten only yesterday. They skirted the ruins of Harrenhal, which loomed like a lesson written in an angry hand across 5 pages of history. Daenerys did not look away from it. "It will be like that," she said softly, "if I get it wrong. All of it, every city, not just my enemies." She did not ask John to reassure her. He did not. He put his hand on hers a moment where no one saw and removed it before anyone could misread it as comfort sufficient to answer the ache. At the Ruby Ford, they camped in a low ring and listened to water talk over stones that remembered crowns bobbing away from heads, and ghosts that thought they were men a little longer. Tyrion walked the bank and threw pebbles, his mind busy as a weather vane in a squall. "Cersei will not meet us in the field if she can help it," he said to John without preamble. "She will ration our courage. She will tempt us into breaking a line to save someone she pretends is important. She will burn a town with wildfire and say we did it. She will do anything to make this fight about anything but her. She will also stand on a wall and drink wine and make men she has never seen die for the way she likes to lean on a balcony," John said. "We have known her shape. We know it better now. I used to think knowing a woman well was the same as loving her," Tyrion said, grim mirth in his mouth. "Now I know it is only the first requirement for fighting her without becoming her." "Is that what you did?" John asked. "I am still trying," Tyrion said. "Ask me in a year if I failed." They crossed the Blackwater on a day when it unfroze briefly in its skin, scabbed river opening its eye for a look and then closing it again. Columns of smoke marked the city long before its walls rose. King's Landing had a way of looking larger the nearer you came, as if the city drew breath with its own bellows. Banners along the parapets showed lions with their mouths open, not roaring. Smiling, they set their lines on the hills that overlook the Rose Road, far enough not to invite a reckless sally, near enough to make a point. Daenerys kept the dragons low and scarce. Euron's black sails had been seen at Blackwater Bay like teeth. Men who knew ships counted the masts and did the quiet math of how many fires the day held in its pocket. Cersei did as predicted and as a surprise both. She sent Qyburn with a white flag and a tongue that sounded kind until you listened to the words it carried. He brought terms. They tasted of poison diluted in honey. Surrender, excuse, pardon for some men who would betray their friends, punishment for those who did not. The city would be saved if it agreed to love her more quickly. She invited Daenerys to dine and be told how mistaken she had been. "Tell her we will meet her beneath the Red Keep where the skulls once sat," Daenerys said. "We will stand where men kept dragons as trophies to warn others against the danger of hope. We will see if that space teaches either of us anything this time." Qyburn's smile did not move when he heard it, but the corners of his eyes pinched as if the sun had found them. "As you wish," he said, and slipped away through the lines like a shadow finding lower ground. They went in with small escort, the kind meant to show good faith without actually trusting the concept. Jon walked beside Daenerys in the cavern. He smelled old bones when none lay there now, the faint salt of dried blood that no water has successfully washed. The walls remembered fire as a shape rather than a heat. They had a curve to them that made words sound sensible even when they weren't. Cersei descended as if she had not walked a stair in a month and meant to remind her legs how. Jaime was not with her. Rumor had him in the Riverlands or not at all. The mountain trailed her like a blunted threat that had already been used to break a few men and would not be sheathed until someone told it enough, in a language it recognized. "You came," Cersei said. "I didn't expect that. I think very little of you, and people who love to be adored don't tend to come when I crook a finger." "I didn't come for you," Daenerys said. "I came for the people you believe are yours. They believe it too because you let them believe it when it makes your wine sweeter." Cersei's eyes slid to Jon with an interest that would have been charming if it hadn't felt like a dog assessing a stew pot. "And the northern bastard who is not a bastard, who breaks spears and stories. Here he is too. I had a man counted better at breaking stories than you. He left me to go think about thinking somewhere else with one hand and my father's gold. How does it feel to be a myth, Snow? Cold? Comforting? Do men touch you to see if you are real?" "Less and less," Jon answered, honest in a way he knew she could not use without making herself look the poorer for it. "They have work to do." "Work," Cersei repeated, the word curdling. "You do it and people sing about you. I do it and they call me cruel. I do not think we can be friends. Perhaps we can be polite while we decide how many of THM die to make the rest easier to govern. I would prefer not to burn my city. You would prefer not to kill any child. We are both going to fail at our preferences today." She lifted a hand. The mountain stepped forward with a large wooden chest and set it down heavily. Qyburn flipped the lid and revealed a crossbow of peculiar design. Scorpion arms reinforced, a bolt with a head like a needle that had learned how to be cruel. "I can kill your dragons," she said to Daenerys, friendly as any hostess showing someone the silver. "I prefer not to, but I do not prefer many things we both know I will do." Jon looked at the bolt and then at Daenerys and saw the thin skin of fear across her mouth for a heartbeat. The extra breath someone takes at the top of a stair when they miscounted steps. He stepped closer so that his shoulder almost touched hers. He did not speak. He let the implication of his warmth sit between them. Cersei's smile sharpened. "You have a way of finding men who will stand beside you," she told Daenerys. "I never did. Men stood beside me because the door behind me led elsewhere. Now they stand beside me because there are fewer doors. It is an improvement of a kind. Shall we discuss terms, or shall we stand here among fossilized bravery and look at each other's toys?" Tyrion stepped forward then. His face was the one he wore when he had decided someone must be told a truth they would refuse and that he would enjoy telling anyway because everything that followed would be ugly. "Terms," he said. "The city opens its gates. Your soldiers lay down arms. You are escorted to a comfortable villa far from here where you will be visited by a small, carefully curated circle of admirers who have no armies and no ambitions but to be liked by a woman who will have all the time in the world to appreciate liking. Your child is protected. You will not see him grow up to fight for a throne. He will grow up to be a man who perhaps never has to learn how to use a knife properly. You will live. Many others will too." Cersei made a small noise in her throat that could have been amusement or a swallow. "And what will my epitaph say in this new world you build of equal parts idealism and ash?" Cersei Lannister, who stepped aside like a well-behaved kitchen stool when a better chair arrived. "I think not." She tipped the bolt in the chest with 2 fingers. "I will enjoy seeing your dragon's face when this touches it. I will enjoy it in my dreams even if I do not live to see it with my waking eyes." Daenerys' hand moved a fraction. Jon felt it and knew that if the movement completed itself, the cavern would fill with a heat that would teach the skulls new lessons. He lifted his hand and set it very lightly on her wrist. The muscle there jumped but did not pull away. "Walk away," Jon said, addressing Cersei with the tone he used when negotiating with a man who had too much pride and a bad horse he meant to ride into a river. Walk away and live the rest of your days where no one will come to tell you stories you like. You can decide that you prefer being alive. Some men do. I will not shame you for it. Shame me, Cersei breathed. You? Something passed across her face then that was not anger and not pain. It was the ghost of a memory, a girl in a tower who believed the right words could open any lock. It was gone at once, eaten by the woman who had survived by learning to be made of locks. Go back to your camp, Jon Snow. Go back to your goddess and your tree. We will see which of us keeps what we prefer. They went back with the taste of old stone on their tongues. The meeting had been a ritual they were all required to perform, like washing the face of a corpse before tossing it into a river. Changed nothing, yet rituals find cracks in men and pour into them. Jon felt something settle. Resolve, perhaps, or that stubborn resignation that looks like resolve when you stand far enough away. Qyburn scorpions will be in the walls and the towers, Grey Worm said. We break them first, then we burn the ships, then we make a hole and go through it. We do not burn the city, Jon said. We burn what must burn so that men will stop holding their breath and making fire spread, Daenerys said, favoring him a glance that had a smile halfway toward it. We will find the narrowest line and walk it. We will fall off it sometimes. Try not to watch me every time I do and shout wrong before I have righted myself. He grunted, which in him passed for an agreement to be kinder than he wanted to be. The assault, when it came, did not feel like a battle so much as a long surgery. The dragons moved in, low and deliberate, blowing fire only when the scorpion heads cocked. Grey Worm squads went forward in quiet bursts, the sound of their sandals on stone like a metronome ticking time. The northern men dragged mantlets and swore at the weight and then laughed when the weight turned out to be less than they were expecting because expectation is a heavier thing than oak. Archers traded their axioms with the walls. Tyrion watched and sent runners and changed a line here and there by a pace, and then smiled like a man whose gamble has landed when a tower that should have held out for hours decided it was tired and sat down. Euron's ships lunged like dogs and snapped at water and found only teeth in return. Rhaegal tore a mast and then another and learned to stay above the flat arc of bolts that had learned dragon heights by guess. The bay glowed green once, the old sin in the city's blood trying to rise. Found no seam. The booms dragged and snagged, and wildfire hissed into the sea with a disappointed sigh as ugly as anything Jon had ever heard. Inside the city, panic moved faster than any man. Cersei stood on a balcony and watched men love her by dying. She drank. She smiled. Then a small sound reached her from the earth below the keep. A sound only a woman who has learned what the ground says when it is about to betray you hears, a settling. She put her cup down with infinite care and walked inside. She did not run. She told herself it was because queens don't. The truth was she had known running never once got her anything but bruise and breathlessness and men laughing. She meant to be neither bruised nor laughed at today. It ended not in a paroxysm but in a quiet that men did not trust. The gates opened and no new fire spilled. The mountain fell in a slow, puzzled folding when a small figure slipped past big men and drove a slender, unassuming blade up under a bar of steel around his neck and found the place where a man hides the little truth of his life. Arya slid free like breath does in winter and looked up at the woman standing on the steps a few yards above, shock widening her eyes for the first time in years. Cersei did not scream. She pressed one hand to her throat as if to keep inside what was always coming out, and then she met Arya's eyes and, to Jon's later astonishment when Arya said it, smiled, not kindly at all, but as a woman who has always liked an honest thing done neatly. I always wondered, Cersei said, voice clean as bone. Now I know. She sat down on the step because the ground had begun to tilt and because queens do not fall down in public if they can help it. Jon walked through the ash that wasn't ash afterward, the chalkiness of dust that rebels mutter raises from stone when cities decide not to be their old shapes anymore. Daenerys moved beside him with her head bare and hair blackened in streams where soot had found it. She was smaller than he remembered from the walls. Kings shrink and swell in the mind according to the distance from which you view them. She looked like a woman who had lifted something heavier than her own body for too many hours and now needed not to be a symbol for a little while. "We did not burn it," she said. "All of it. We did not burn it all." "No," John agreed. His voice felt like it belonged to someone who had been up all night, which he had. "We took a city that seems ugly enough to last us a while without gilding it with extra sins." Tyrion found them where the skulls had once sat. He was covered in the same dust as everyone else and looked like a man who had learned a joke and forgotten the punchline. "It will not love you," he told Daenerys. "Not at once, not ever entirely, but it will tolerate you long enough for you to keep your promises. That is better than love for a queen. Love turns quickly. Toleration takes work to change. Do the work and it will hold." Daenerys looked at the low curve of the ceiling and the ribs that remembered dragons and said nothing for a long moment. "I will do the work," she said then. "And when I do it badly, tell me. And when I do it well, do not be afraid to say so just because it will make me unbearable." "I do not fear you being unbearable," Tyrion said. "I fear my own taste for ease. I like being right, and it is easier to be right next to a tyrant than a woman who tries and fails and tries again." Outside, the day leaned toward evening. The smoke thinned and let the light through in places like stained glass. Green there, gold here, brown where a roof still smoldered. Men opened doors cautiously and found someone other than soldiers standing in the street. Grey Worm had his men break lines not to raid, but to carry out old women who had been sitting on stools for hours waiting to see whether life would happen again beyond their thresholds. Northern boys who had never seen a city held their noses against 1,000 smells and then laughed when a cart of oranges broke and spilled and the street was suddenly the summer sea. They sent ravens north. They sent fiscal men to the counting houses. They sent honest brutes to the cellars to tally what Qyburn had been building and stop it from being fired by some too earnest fool who wanted to see what it did. They sent Sansa a letter that was more like a ledger. This done, this unfinished, this impossible with present resources, this possible if you teach men how to want it. She wrote back and told Jon what to do with the winter stores in the city because South had granaries full of things North had only in songs. Move this here, that there, cut off this man's bribery at the knee and make a clean salary of it so that he will stop stealing in order to feel he is being paid. Jon found a small room with a narrow bed and a slit for a window and slept there one night like a boy. He dreamed not of spears or of breaking them. He dreamed of a warm stone lay above a cold river and a trickle finding it first. He woke and saw in his mind the seam on the shard-kissing Longclaw's ripple and felt the sword as something faintly alive near his skin. Not hungry, not proud, only attentive. When he walked the yard outside the Red Keep, men saluted in the way they do when they think they ought first and then because they want to. He nodded. He was not someone to shout for. He was someone to count upon. That is worse in some ways. It never ends. He went down to the dragon pit and stood where air moves differently, the circle of it making every word return to the mouth that spoke it. Drogon came and lay, not close enough to harm him by accident. Regal settled on a broken lintel and watched Jon with one eye as if it were weighing him for a thought. Jon lifted his hand. He did not expect the dragon to come. He came anyway. He put his great head under Jon's palm and made a rumble like a hill sliding. The heat there reminded Jon that life is not an argument. It is a fact first. "Do you remember the cold?" Jon asked him softly. The dragon blinked. Jon felt foolish because he had asked a wrong question of a thing that does not care for questions. "You will not have to taste it as you did," he added unnecessarily. "Not soon." He found Arya sprawled on the steps, polishing a small blade with a rag that had seen better days. She looked up with the frankness he treasured and cared for, with a care that embarrassed him if he thought about it too closely. "You look like you slept," she observed. "For a change. You should do it again sometime. It makes you less hard to stare at." Duly noted. She flicked her eyes toward the heart of the city, where people were already bartering for the things people must barter for after sieges. Salt fish, spare boots, the favor of men who would forget they had ever given it as soon as the wind changed. "Sansa will hate it here," she said. "She will bear it like a splinter, but she will make it work." That is either the curse or the blessing of us. We make things work we don't enjoy. Then we get angry when other people expect us to keep doing it. Do you? John asked. Do I what? Get angry. Her mouth twitched. I get even, she said. Sometimes I get happy. You should try it. She stood. I'm going to Bravos when the thaw comes and the seas remember their manners. There's a thing I left undone. I want to decide if I still want to do it. Her eyes brushed him, affection and distance both. I'll come back if the river tells me to. He wanted to ask her what things stood and waited for her in a city where men pretend money is a god and then learn it is an altar that eats them. He did not. Love does not make questions smaller. It makes them larger and teaches you to leave them alone anyway. He found Daenerys later in a room that had been meant for queens who like tapestries. She had rolled 2 of them up and set them aside because they told stories she did not intend to keep telling herself. She stood with her hand on a window frame, looking out at the city that was attempting to become a place where a human being could take a breath and not cough. The wind lifted a strand of hair near her temple and set it back because even the wind knew better than to be presuming. It will not love me, she said, echoing Tyrion without knowing she did. I don't need it. I need it to go on beating its heart. The rest will come or it won't. Do the work, Jon said. She smiled a little. Look at you, a man of brevity when the world is full of long-winded speeches. She turned and examined his face as if for a missing screw. Do you love me? He could have said yes because it would have been true and also insufficient. He could have said I will as soon as I have time. That would have been a cruelty dressed as consolation. He could have said I love too many things and do not yet know how to sort them, which would have been honest and not useful. He looked down at his hands, which had held steel and bark and a shard, and up again. I will stand with you, he said. I will tell you when you are wrong. I will try not to enjoy it. I will do the work. Her eyes went wet and then did not. I will take that, she said. The rest. If the world leaves us time for it, we can see what else fits beside the work. She lifted her palm, and he set his against it. Their fingers did not twine. It was not a lover's gesture. It was a pact. It was also a tenderness, the sort that can fit in a room full of maps and men waiting to report on latrines. In the days that followed, they drew lines across parchment and then across streets. They lifted laws from old damp sacks and shook the mildew out of them and found a few worth keeping. They brought bread to places where bread had been a rumor. They hung men where they needed to and spared some who expected to be hung because mercy must be taught or it dies of neglect. They sent riders to the Reach to talk in soft voices about grain and tariffs and the deep desire of simple people to sell things without someone in a golden lion cloak snatching their profits in the name of a man who had spilled wine on them once and forgotten incident and insult alike. The shard under Jon's jerkin warmed one afternoon when a wind cut across the yard with a chill in it different from any King's Landing had known. He paused, hand on the hilt, and felt the old seam in Longclaw resonate with a thought he could not quite hear. Past. He breathed out. He remembered Bran's words about confusion as kindness, about teaching a cruel thing to hesitate. He hoped that when winter remembered its face again, it would still look slightly puzzled when it tried to turn a spear upon the world. A month after the city opened its gates, a rider arrived from the Riverlands with a sack tied to his saddle horn. He handed it up to Davos with the solemnity of a man delivering a child and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Davos opened it and pulled out Jaime Lannister's golden hand. Tyrion stood very still and did not cry. Later, he took the hand to a room and set it on a table and poured wine into it and then drank from it. Jon found him there and said nothing. Tyrion raised the grotesque cup in a silent toast, then grimaced. It leaks, he said. My father would have appreciated the irony. My sister would have thrown it at my head. He sighed. He died saving strangers, he added after a while, or saving himself by doing a thing that looked like saving strangers from a distance. The difference hardly matters to them. To you? Jon asked. To me it matters every moment and not at all when I sleep, Tyrion said. I miss him. I also hate him. Time keeps trying to make one of those win. I refuse. Sansa arrived with the second thaw and stepped down onto a flagstone with the gravitas of someone who intends to move a piece on a board and has already calculated the next 4 moves. She kissed Daenerys as a queen kisses another when she chooses to and turned to Jon and embraced him as a sister does who has decided she will forgive him for putting her in a position that required her to grow faster than she had planned. "You have made it work," she said. "I hate that you made it work. Now they'll expect it of you forever." "They'll expect it of you too," he said. "They already do," she replied, eyes bright with laughter that had more teeth than mirth. "I am going home. I will govern a land that prefers to sleep with a knife because it finds the weight comforting. I will count grain. I will make sure widows do not sell their shoes for firewood. I will say no to 3 men a day who want me to say yes because they like to think words are pawns." She touched his sleeve. "And I will send you broth when you are ill because you won't tell anybody you are. You will drink it and think yourself mocked. You will not be. This is what family is. It is broth sent across long roads." Arya kissed Sansa's cheek. "I'll come and go," she said. "You always wanted me to. Remember to be a little kind to me about it." "I never wanted you to leave," Sansa said. "No," Arya replied. "And it's good that you never learned how to want what you were going to get anyway. Otherwise you might have been happy and then I wouldn't know you. They were not done with war. No world in which men are ambitious and hungry and wounded is done with war. But the shape of it changed, and where once the cold had taught men to lift spears and die quietly, now confusion taught it to pause and listen, and sometimes in that pause a hand closed a door quietly and a child fell asleep with bread in her stomach instead of fear. Jon walked the city and then the road north and then the yard of Winterfell, and in each place he practiced the same magic he had learned when he broke a spear. He asked the world to prefer warmth, he asked stories to be better, and he listened when they refused until they found they did not mind saying yes. The godswood's red leaves unfurled in spring like flags soaked clean. He stood beneath them with long claw laid against the roots. Bran sat nearby, hands folded, eyes deep. "You were right," Jon said. "I don't like what older magic made me. More myself. I also like it. I can hold both." Bran nodded. "You'll have to." He looked up at the white face. "He would be pleased." "Brandon the Builder?" Jon asked. "Our father," Bran said. "He would be pleased because you did the thing that needed doing without making a ballad of it. He would be annoyed that you did not wash before dinner." Jon laughed then, genuinely, a sound that startled the ravens. "He would." "Yes," Bran said. He tilted his head as if hearing something most men would have called wind. "There will be other spears. There will be other winters. Men are very good at building them. But a story learned a new path this year. That matters more than anything you did with steel." Jon ran his thumb along Longclaw's pommel. He thought of rivers warming stones and of dragons lowering great heads to let mortal hands rest against scales. He thought of Sansa counting and Arya going and returning and going again, and of Daenerys holding a city like a hot loaf she meant to share and not burn. He thought of Tyrion drinking from a golden hand and finding it leaked and drinking anyway. "Tell me when I start to enjoy being right," he said. "I will," Bran said. "And when you start to enjoy being wrong, I'll remind you that there are easier ways to make friends." They sat where the red leaves listened, and for a while the world asked nothing of them but breath. The summer that would come would be short, as all summers are after long winters. That did not make it worth less. It made it precious. Jon let the sunlight touch his face through red and white and closed his eyes the way a man will when he has finally found a place to set down what he has been carrying and knows he will have to pick it up again, and doesn't mind just then. When evening came, the torches along the inner ward took, and their fire was only fire, the kind that warms hands and cooks porridge and reminds men they chose to live. The sword at Jon's side slept like a thing that had done a day's work. The shard at his breast lay quiet. He walked the wall, and the sound the wind made through the crenels was no longer a keening. It was only wind. Ghost ranged ahead and paused when he found a scent worth learning and looked back when he learned it, making sure Jon was where he ought to be. He was, and tomorrow he would be again. That is how stories do not end. and men live inside them anyway.